The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
Wait, Tylor, I know what that means now.
Yeah, no, you really don't.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read-along podcast. I, of course, am Tylor, your host who knows these books and loves these books and doesn't always excuse when Robert Jordan gives us 5 straight kind of boring chapters. I'm sorry, Greg. I'm joined, of course, by Greg, who was just mentioned, who is probably mad at me for telling him this book would get really great, and then we got a bunch of Perrin going through the farms chapters. How did you feel about this week? Because this could be like the big action payoff to what had been building for the past couple of weeks. But I think both of us are the kind of readers who are not necessarily enthralled by action, and thus we're not as taken by these chapters.
Wheel in the time keeps on turning, man. I don't have a lot to say. Yeah, I mean, I think we are in a little bit of a holding pattern, and I think I feel the way you just described, and then I'm like, but I feel bad, right? Because I should care more about the return to Two Rivers. And I think we are getting some really good Perrin content across not just this week, but last week, where we are learning more about him and seemingly, not to spoil the chapter ahead, it is just one chapter tonight, so people aren't doing the split thing. Yeah. So in chapter 33, a new weave in the pattern, I would say we're seeing Perrin maybe accidentally, but really turning into a leader. And so that's exciting and fun. And to see him kind of, whether he's recognizing it or not, take that big step, I think has been fun to read, even if I found myself lost in names for a while in this chapter and just like, oh, I should go back and learn them. And then I'm like, no, I shouldn't. Like these people don't matter. They're just headed to Emmons Field now, not even going to be in these books anymore.
So you think Robert Jordan will make one of these characters the savior of the world, but we don't know which one. So instead, why don't we just jump into what is probably going to be like a 5 to 10 minute summary? Because this was a long chapter that both of us think was kind of plotty, and that means I have a lot of things to say. Chapter 33, a new weave in the pattern. Lord Luke enters. He is a bit older. He is kind of gray at the temples. He's described as having really hard features, and Perrin hates him immediately. All of the men and boys at the farm kind of swarm Luke. They're all smiles, but you can tell that Luke is kind of seemingly weary of the attention. He's kind of dismissive of these people, and Perrin seems to think of him as kind of stuck up. Luke recognizes Verin as Aes Sedai immediately and seems a little bit put off by it. She asks him if he is from the Borderlands, because that's what his name sounds like, but he says he is from Murrendy. Luke ignores Tomas, the warder, which Perrin thinks is arrogant, and is warm towards Fael, although once she mentions that she is a hunter for the Horn, he immediately becomes a bit more distant and doesn't seem to want to talk about why he came to the Two Rivers, because it doesn't seem to be the case that he thinks that the Horn will necessarily be here. Perrin obviously is jealous because a human is talking to Fael and thinks that he knows where the Horn is, so he's got one up on Lord Luke. Luke looks startled when he sees Perrin, and Perrin thinks that it looks like he recognizes him and was surprised to see him here. He also thinks that Luke seems somewhat afraid of Perrin. Luke apparently is the one who suggested that the boys kind of stand guard on the top of the building, but Perrin says that that's not nearly enough warning morning, and that all of them would have died in multiple Trolloc attacks if it weren't for the White Cloaks, which means that they are now at the White Cloaks' mercy. They basically they push back, saying they're doing the best they can, but Perrin seems to dissuade a lot of their arguments by admitting that he himself is fearful of the Trollocs. At this point, Luke kind of tries to pin the White Cloaks on Perrin, suggesting that he thinks that the White Cloaks should actually be the ones protecting them. But Perrin kind of counters, saying that clearly he has no goodwill towards the White Cloaks. They want to kill him. At this point, Perrin starts to kind of rally them against the idea of ever kind of like being separated. He tells them that if they are gathered together, they will actually be able to do something to help themselves, and they'll no longer be reliant on the White Cloaks. And he suggests that they gather either in Watch Hill or they make their way towards Emmon Field. They pretty quickly actually seem to come around to this plan, even in spite of many of the objections. And it seems to some degree it is the women pushing towards gathering somewhere else and abandoning the farm. They kind of come along with this idea much more quickly than expected. Luke then excuses himself quietly, and everyone kind of begins to start gathering their things and start to make ready to leave quickly. They say that they'll stop at another farm and start spreading this plan. And then at this point, Perrin says he plans to free the hostages who have been taken by the White Cloaks. Verin overhears this and calls it a bold plan. And Verin also says that all of these people only turn to his side because he is a Taviran, and he's been able to cause a major change in just a single conversation. She then also suggests, or she asks him whether Rand holds Kalendor, and he says yes, and then warns him against Alana, saying that a Taviran would be too valuable a tool for many Aes Sedai to ignore. Fail at this point says that she's been a fool, observes Perrin's jealousy, and begins kind of apologizing, asking Perrin to forgive her. He accepts the apology and apologizes for everything he said, which of course causes Fael to be very upset because all he said does not include the spanking. Perrin realizes that he is in trouble, but doesn't entirely understand why. At this point, 4 of the young men who have been at this farm join his group despite Perrin's protests. This is Will, Ban, Tell, and Daniel. I'm not going to give all of the names, but I figure I'd give a list or two just to make you feel bad. And Perrin basically agrees to take charge of the boys without realizing that he is the one taking charge. All of the boys freak out when they see the Aiel after they have left town, and Will seems somewhat interested in Bane and Chiad, who kind of look threatening, but possibly interested. Perrin begins talking to several of the farms along their way, causing all of them to head towards Emmon's Field, but also causing his party to grow as more and more boys join and want to go on the patrol that Perrin is currently on. Perrin, in order to create division among the boys, divides them into companies, putting Daniel and Ban in charge. Perrin also has to yell at them to kind of shape up, and while Perrin was only imitating Uno, everyone seems quite impressed, including Fael. They stop warning the farms as they get further on for fear of advertising to the White Cloaks that they are there, and eventually they leave the boys behind as Perrin gives them instructions for how to keep quiet, and then Fael asks if he was ever a soldier. He says he's just heard them talk. They make their way to a hill where they can look down on the White Cloak camp, observing several riders who are arriving from the direction of Emmon's Field. Perrin asks Tam to look after the boys and have them eat. Tam and Abel basically acknowledge that he has taken on a leadership role and that they are kind of willing to follow him, and Perrin also realizes that they've stopped calling him lad or any other kind of names for him being young. At this point, Verin says that he is changing the 2 rivers in the same way that Rand is changing the world. He denies it, but then asks the Aiel to sneak past the White Cloaks along with him, and with some hesitation, Fael. They make their way into the camp relatively easily. I refer to it in my notes as some Metal Gear Solid stuff. Eventually, they have to knock out one guard who notices Fael, but eventually they make their way towards the prison tent where Gaul and the maidens neutralize the guards. They wake the prisoners, gather more of the cloaks from the people who have been knocked out, which allows them to move through the camp at least relatively unnoticed, and eventually they make their way towards the horse lines, where it is noted the horses are only guarded on the other side, not the side from within the camp. They are able to get the everyone onto horses, despite the Luhans being huge and so it being a challenge. Eventually, they run just as the alarm is being raised. They meet up with Tam and the boys. The mood is celebratory, and it turns out that Master Luhan hates Perrin's beard. That's a note that definitely needed to be in here. And then Tam, Gall, the prisoners, Abel, a few of the boys, and eventually, after some kind of concern, Fail are all taken somewhere to hide. And when Perrin asks Verin for help, she offers a heavy rain in about a half of an hour. Perrin tells the boys that they will draw the white cloaks away, and then they start shouting, running away. When Will asks them what they will do next, Perrin says they will hunt Trollocs. And Greg, as is often the case, God, do I need you to say words so that I can take a break.
Man, my favorite part of that was the very beginning when you started and you said Lord Luke, but it sounded like you said Lord Luke enters, like you're a Southern woman of some kind. And I started laughing and I was like, I want to interrupt his flow and say how I liked that, but then I was like, it's a long flow, so I won't do that. Well, I will say that I did like this chapter. I know we're kind of saying like, yeah, it's a little plot heavy. It was good to finally move away eventually from chit chat to action. But I will say my main takeaway from this chapter is kind of just seeing what it means to be Verin and what it's going to look like for Perrin to be Verin. And I thought it was Verin, which is now not to Verin, who's in this chapter, but to Verin. So
get ready
to
for more of
Verin,
that.
And I really enjoy that Verin points it out, right? Like in case we had somehow missed the point of this, she said all it took was you kind of laying out a basic logical case, and everybody flipped pretty instantly. And I forget the exact wording she uses, but like, the Two Rivers is on a much different path just with one afternoon of Perrin running around. And I think that's a reminder to all of us that, when Perrin and Matt are near Rand, they are very much the small eddies beside the giant whirlpool. But when you get one of these on their own, they can really have a big effect on the events around them. And so there are a lot of specifics that you went through, but I will say I think the big takeaway here is just that Perrin has the power of the Verin, and it's going to start to feel more present as this book continues.
Yeah, I think when I read the title of this chapter, I saw a new weave in the pattern and I was like, oh, that must be Lord Luke. But the more I read this chapter, he exits very quickly. And I come to realize this chapter isn't called a new thread in the weave. It's called a new weave in the pattern. It's not about a new person who has arrived. It's about the new way that the threads are weaving themselves around Perrin. And that, I think you're exactly right to highlight as kind of the through line through a chapter that kind of feels divided. There's a bunch of different chunks in it that I think you could pull out as discrete and maybe could have been their own chapters if this was a book with a lot shorter chapters. But I think you're right to say kind of the big message throughout all of this is just how much Perrin is changing everything in the Two Rivers and redirecting lives that otherwise would have gone in very different directions.
Yeah, we've already made the comparison to the hobbits returning at the end of Return of the King, and they seem so much more worldly. But I think it is more about being Verin than it is about having seen the world now. But Perrin is walking through these farms with boys who may be younger than him, but are him, right? Like these are exactly who he, Rand, and Matt were up until the start of this adventure. And it's really dramatic to see how foolish the boys seem. Again, that you highlighted in your summary, they're like shocked and amazed to see Aiel, even though this is now commonplace for Perrin. So I think all of this is meant to show like Perrin is very different than his home now. And big fish, little pond type message.
I think that's exactly right. I don't want to lose sight too much of the first quarter of this chapter, which includes Lord Luke, because I think it's very easy in light of the rest of the chapter to kind of gloss over that. So what were your impressions on Luke, right? We get this new character arriving, and I thought it was really interesting that the way we get introduced to him is having him react to a bunch of characters he apparently doesn't know, right? He knows what an Aes Sedai looks like. He seems dismissive of warders, even though they're incredible warriors. He seems familiar with Perrin somehow. There's a lot of kind of oddity in that sequence. And so I'm curious if anything stood out or what your kind of take on this character is, because he does just kind of blow through the early part of the chapter and vanish just as quickly as he arrived.
You said it. I was expecting much more here, and we had talked last episode if he was Slayer, Slayer and Stalker, the Slayer Stalker, the Stalaker, Slayer. And I don't think that that's necessarily not true, but kind of my summary note was like, he seems like he's helpful, just not nearly as helpful as he thinks he is, right?
Yeah.
Like he's more of a braggart and more of a presence than he actually is somebody changing things and doing good works and so on. So it like I feel like I know that guy, right?
Yeah.
He's the member of your high school class who's now a police chief in your hometown, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's not that you're doing bad work, you're just not, the key to this whole world like you think you are as a part of this.
I think where I get stuck with Lord Luke is I keep like switching back on myself about what game I think Robert Jordan is playing, right? Like either Lord Luke is kind of like you're describing, like the braggart, the person who maybe doesn't have the authority or doesn't really know as much as he thinks. And he's like, here's my plan. And then he backs off as soon as Perrin has a better plan. The other alternative, which is also an archetype in fantasy, is someone who pretends like they're bad at politics so that they can then win over people in a particular way. And there are moments in the Luke Perrin exchange where it feels like Luke is really kind of playing off the fears of the Two Rivers folk to try to keep them divided in a way that makes me kind of skeptical of him. And so I'm simultaneously like bouncing back and forth between like he's too dumb to be an effective villain, he must be a good guy, and maybe there's actually a layer beyond what we're seeing in this chapter that would make him eligible for that like master planner bad guy kind of role, right? Like I could see either way, and I find myself doing the Princess Bride thing. I'm like, well, you know that he knows that you know that he knows, so he must be dumb.
Yeah. Well, you said Princess Bride thing, which is correct, but then you made it into the Friends thing. So
I haven't seen
I don't know which
Friends.
way you're going on that. Oh, okay. I think because we know there is another Forsaken on the table, that's the only thing keeping option B open to me, right? Like it's nothing in him in this chapter that made me think there's that hidden depth. It's much more like because we've had all these strong hints that there's a very dangerous new force, including that Padan Fane is afraid of a new presence. Like
Yeah.
that's the only thing that's really making me keep that on the table. In his current presence, he just feels a little more chaotic than that kind of level of scheming that you're suggesting. But, all of this is to say it's also pretty brief. It's not like we spent a long time with him. And like you said, he's mostly reacting and not doing things of his own accord.
I just want to mention one more little detail about Luke, and then we can certainly jump somewhere else. There is a very early detail, I think in my book is in the third line of this chapter. Luke has red hair, which is something that we have noted before is odd, right? Red hair is pretty much only present in this world among Aiel and among people who are from a particular area of Andor, particularly the royal family. So this is an odd characteristic that gets glossed over very quickly, but he is described as having dark red hair that is white-winged at the temples. So if we are thinking of someone either from the Aiel or potentially Andor maybe who is of an older generation, if we're looking for who he could be, if he's someone from the past or something along those lines, these are at least details that give us culture potentially, right? Verin pointed to the Borderlands, I'm pointing to Aiel something.
And just to also note the white winged, meaning to me, he's a little older, right? Don't put him on he's being separated from the boys
Yeah.
as, somebody who's been around longer. And, Fail as well, who's like immediately like, oh, I'm a hunter of the horn too.
Yeah.
Almost, there's the whole, I don't care about the teen drama, but you flirted with him and blah, 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 like, whatever. But there is that kind of like buddy, but then it doesn't amount to anything. There's still a separation there. So.
Yeah, no, I like that. I don't really have anything else to say about the debate among the villagers and Perrin and Luke, right? This was the scene I think that most exemplified what we were talking about before, with Perrin kind of warping people's, positions and getting them to do things they otherwise wouldn't have. Was there anything else kind of in that farmhouse scene that stood out to you? Or was it kind of like, for me, I felt like this was like, okay, we have a page where we hear the arguments and then they go along with him because that's how the story goes.
Yeah, so I didn't have anything else on that section. I don't think. My next note, which is either giving my last thought on that scene or transitioning us to the next thing, is I thought the really important detail that will definitely come up again in the future was Verin giving Perrin a little warning about Lyanna, right?
Alana.
Like that sorry, say it again.
Alana.
Alana. Sorry.
You're good. There are too many Aes Sedai.
So the warning about Alana, pause for edit. Thank you for making me look good, Tyler. If you leave this in, you're just a complete jerk. And
I am
there. So I thought the standout moment in the next piece of the chapter was Verin's warning about Alana, and it felt striking to me that the divisions within the Aes Sedai should not just be seen as there's a Black Aja and everybody else is unified, but Verin goes out of her way to warn him that there are purposes within the White Tower that may not be evil, but are also not good. And so to be mindful of that. And I was immediately kind of crossing my eyes and trying to look at the TV show and thinking, well, I haven't really gotten that vibe on the TV show. It means it could be coming. It isn't coming because we've certainly spent more time with Alana on the TV show. But and I think that's true even if you've only watched the first season, which we definitely have only watched the first season. Definitely. We haven't already recorded episodes about the second season. So I just got called out this weekend by a fan for being bad at the timeline, but I'm still pretend I'm faking it like a master. So all of that is to say that felt very significant to me. Like, I'm playing the Tylor game. The Tylor game to me is when you have a plot heavy chapter, try to find the little character beats within it that matter. This one mattered.
Yeah, I think that's a really good flag to be putting up there. The other one kind of related to that is Verin has been sitting on finding a time to ask Perrin, does Rand have Calendor, for a chapter and a half now. And I think it's very interesting that she didn't do the usual Verin thing of like try to ambush him in the middle. She just outright asks, right? And that's a very different dynamic than I think she's had with other characters before, as is her outright warning Perrin about Alana, right? She seems to be helping Perrin more than she had previously helped, right? She was a watcher who didn't really do anything. And so I'm then curious, like, is this Verin the politician trying to get in with Perrin, or is it Verin kind of finally, to some degree, warming up to someone and offering them help unasked?
Here's the definitive answer that I definitely have, being the expert on this book. No, what I read this moment, I don't think Verin really cares about Perrin. I think, and they rhyme, and yet they can't get together. I think Verin is much more kind of curious and amused. And so to me, I wouldn't place her as trying to buddy up to Perrin. I think she's kind of watching, and again, the comment about him being Taviran, I think is kind of pure amazement and amusement, right? It's
Yeah.
like it's just incredible how it happens. Like, like she's read this in books forever and is seeing it play out in front of
Yeah.
her and is kind of shocked at the same time, like how kind of novel it is. And so I would say that she's not trying to buddy up or play politics as much as she just wants to know what's going on everywhere else. And that jumps to the end of the chapter where what matters much more to her is that she not be seen as being involved, and that she's away from the White Cloaks,
Yeah.
and offers what limited help she can give with no chance of kind of detection.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good call. I think both her non-help and then also here her non-answer about Alana. She doesn't even say Alana isn't evil. She just says there are not evil plans in the tower, and Alana might be associated with some plan hypothetically. Right? I think that is the layer that keeps me from going like she's warming up to Perrin, because she's still keeping him several arms lengths away. I think you're right about that. I will say my only other note before the characters get on horses and start riding away. This is the first time in me reading these books that I read Perrin's apology and flinched before Fael said anything. Like I was like, "Oh, buddy, you don't just apologize for what you said when you did some stuff. That's not how good husband works."
I mean, I said it before. I continue to not really care about their interpersonal dynamics.
Yeah.
It feels like the stupid cliche of like just get a room, like just get over it, right? You should both just mature. But I think that's a failing of me, to be clear, not a failing of these characters or the writing. But it was good to see the reconciliation, at least so far as
Yeah.
I think he's now treating Fael as an equal, or closer to an equal, and that's what matters to me in their interaction, even if he's not getting all the bases touched. But a spanking is not a base. Anyway, move on quick.
That's not second base in your household? Okay, we need to figure out how this applies. So
Pause for edit, and if Tyler doesn't edit this out, he's a perv. Okay, go on.
Also not going to edit that out. I am an equal opportunity, not editor. I thought that, to me, if the next section is the overland travel section, right? What I think a good video game should let you press a button and not have to experience. I feel like there are two things that stood out to me. One is you already highlighted this kind of difference between Perrin and the other boys of the Two Rivers, and that idea that we are only maybe 16, 17 months from the beginning of the series, and yet the gap between those two groups seemingly could not be larger. The other thing that I thought was kind of fun was the interplay between everyone being impressed at what a good leader of soldiers Perrin is, and Perrin having imposter syndrome because he's literally just repeating what his sweariest friend would do and then putting it through the good place filter so he doesn't swear too much. And I just have to appreciate a book that acknowledges that fake it till you make it is how all leadership roles work.
It definitely reminded me of when I started teaching, right? I was thrown into a classroom in 1 year out of undergrad. I was teaching undergrads, and that is not right. Like I wasn't ready for that. And they were making a lot of money off of me, the unnamed research university I attended. And so like it's just this reminder that like you're right. Like you fake it till you make it. You pretend you know what you're doing, and people respond to that.
Yeah.
Throwing a little Taviran swerve on it, of course, but people respond to someone who acts assuredly, and that's what's happening here. And I don't see the Aiel and Fael reacting as much as you might expect them to this transformation. But I think I would write that off as they're like, oh, look at these Hicks. These Hicks will follow anybody, right? Like, so they kind of are not seeing it as an accomplishment of parents as much as a kind of flaw in the boys.
I think that's totally right about the Aiel. There was one really fun Fael moment related to this where she's like, "Are you sure you haven't been around soldiers? Because my father's guards sometimes act like that." And there's literally an ellipses in the middle of that sentence. And if we've kind of been tracking Fael, like asking weird questions that make us wonder what's the deal with her dad, that was kind of my favorite one we've gotten in a few chapters. It felt like it would fit in a fun little like romp comedy. I appreciated that. And then we break into a White Cloak camp, right? I think there's this great moment where Tam and Abel kind of physically hand off leadership to Perrin and really acknowledge what he's been doing. But other than that, I don't really have a whole lot other than what I described as some Metal Gear Solid stuff, right? Like they hide in the shadows, they literally wait for the guards to talk to each other, turn around, and then go in when it's time. I've played that game. I know how this works. Was that kind of your take as well on this scene?
I would call it Assassin's Creed, but that's just my video game preferences. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this felt like when you, my beloved DM, construct a really complicated adventure, and we get like 3 good rolls at the start of the encounter that
Yeah.
just invalidate everything you set up. And so it's like, oh, you sneak past those 2. Oh, you found the tent right away.
Yeah.
Oh, nobody detects you walk out. And so it, to me, then, it is fun. It's not like it's bad action.
Yeah.
But then I'm playing the game of, is this easy because it's easy, or is this being presented as too easy? And
Right.
my immediate thought, kind of not about Taviran, though, given our discussion tonight, that makes me think a little bit more about Taviran-ness here. I immediately thought, oh, this is going to be really easy so that the retribution can be really, really painful, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like it's so easy that the cloaks are embarrassed and they're going to come back hard
Yeah.
against, I would assume, not this group, but against the innocent town folk who are going to be seen to have abetted
Yeah.
whoever is responsible. And what I complimented Robert Jordan on last week holds true today. This does feel like an occupying force. And, we have fill in your real world example. But in creating that then sets up those expectations, right? It's like, I think Perrin's going to be fine. I think this whole group is going to be fine wherever they're hiding out. It's the cruelty that comes in response. That's the point, and that's going to be what shapes the response to these events.
I really like that. And it actually reminds me of the best advice that I was ever given as a DM, which is the story that the dice want to tell will always be better than the story you want to tell, right? If your characters roll really good, give it to them and then find a way for it to make the bad guy angry enough that there are consequences later, right? And I think that's what Robert Jordan is really good at, is he gives us these stories that have this kind of like really archetypal, I know what this story looks like momentum, and then he finds ways of upending that in really interesting ways. And so that's exactly where I'm at. I'm like, I'm following you every step of the way on how I think this plays out, and I'm waiting for that classic Robert Jordan, and then everything explodes in a way you didn't expect moment. And so that's kind of what gets me excited at the end of this chapter. Is I think you're right, this is good action, but I'm mostly in it for what it means 10 chapters from now.
Yeah. And so we've exhausted everything on my page. So I will just say my last note is just to echo Verin, and I just wrote down like the 2 rivers has shifted, right?
Yeah.
This has been a dramatic afternoon / 2 days. And now like the whole kind of new power dynamics that were in place are now all kind of jumbled up. And I assume, I know from looking at the next page that we're headed away from here, but I assume when we return, we're going to see a lot of consequences from these seemingly simple actions. And I would put on that list an angry batch of white cloaks, a townspeople that might have been like accidentally gestured into an open rebellion. And then like Lord Luke, who thought he was going to master this and, be the leader of the people, and not so much. and then some Aes Sedai that are still around, but playing like they're not still around. So I think I leave these pages really excited about where these plot lines are going, even if I didn't find this to be the like most compelling of sections we've read.
Yeah, I want to say it's Sun Tzu who says something like battle plans last until the first spear is thrown or something like that, right? And that's where I'm at. I'm like, we've been spending so much time laying out the situation here and what is going on and what are everyone's plans. I'm really excited to see all of those plans change when the table gets flipped by Perrin here, right? There's a lot of ways that things can go. And I think you're right to say this is, I think, the perfect time to pull away from this plot line, because now we get some time to wonder. And for us, it's going to be like several weeks instead of several days. That's the challenge of this podcast. Next week, we do have 2 chapters rather than just one. That is chapter 34, He Who Comes with the Dawn, and chapter 35, Sharp Lessons. And we do have a chapter icon that we've seen before at the top of chapter 34. It is the dragon banner, but we are going to see that chapter icon in a whole new way next time. Greg, you can do whatever preview you want and then say the words you thought I was about to say.
I was all there. I was already turning off my microphone. Next time, I look forward to joining you all through the glass columns. So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.